What Once Was Mine, Chapter 30, Rapunzel. On the road again. It's just you and me, Pascal, Rapunzel said brightly. He was perched on her shoulder, looking ahead down the path, almost like he was enjoying the journey as well. Sometimes she peeked behind her, hair trailing out like a long silver veil. Rarely did it snag on anything, which should have made Rapunzel stop and wonder. Nor did she consider how easily she skipped along the path despite the weight of all those locks behind her, how the ends danced and flowed over obstacles like they were weightless. After a few hours, the vegetation in the woods around her became worn down and tired. The air got muggy and close. Trees were now shorter and stuffed fuller of branches. Giant, graceful leaves were replaced with tiny, drier, curlier things that made the shapes of monsters when they fell in drifts. The grass was denser than before, but somehow less lush. The heat, of course, made Pascal more alert. He trotted back and forth on her shoulder, sometimes coming down as far as her arm, and happily ate the gnats that also seemed to enjoy the warmth. Rapunzel noted the changes in the landscape with wonder. She closed one eye and held her thumb out, observing the differences in color and shadow. "Pascal, do you know what all this means?" she whispered. The lizard looked at her the same way he always did, blankly. "There is so much more to learn." She picked him up in her hands and twirled around. "Like decades and decades. Shadow, light, angels, seasons. Think of it. I'll have my hands full and so much painting for years." She trailed off. The silence of the woods fell down on her again. "If I were back in my tower again, I mean," she said, and her voice sounded funny. All by itself, words and letters dwarfed by leaves. "Which," she added nervously, "I may not be?" Pascal just looked at her. "Right. Nothing decided until I figure everything out," she agreed as if he had spoken. "My hair, all these random men after me." She adjusted her pack and continued down the path again. "I mean, I guess I could go back to my tower if I had to, if I really turn out to be dangerous. Or in danger," she continued conversationally. "But maybe Flynn and Gina could drop by once in a while? Even if they stayed on the ground outside. And oh, we could send things back and forth on a rope." Then she remembered what the good wife had said. The circle sits on top of the tallest hill like a crown, hard to miss unless your mind wanders far from your feet. Her mind was definitely wandering, but it was a long ingrained habit. Her feet and body couldn't leave the tower, so for 19 years her mind had wandered beyond its stony walls. What was it like to be a fish? Were there houses in the clouds? Why did Venus seem to have phases like the moon? And that's how she nearly missed the bear. Pascal had sensed it immediately and scurried up to her neck. Rapunzel didn't really notice, thoughtlessly putting her finger up to comfort him. It was only when she heard the low growl that she jumped. Her initial fear was replaced by astonishment at how small the bear was, considering how large they seemed in fairy tales. Without the long, fluffy tail, its body was really only the length of her arm. Its fur was astonishing, a beautiful flame red with black ankles and tiny paws, and lovely ruffs of white under its neck. Long whiskers framed its elegant face and narrow, aristocratic muzzle, and its eyes were a spectacular orange. The poor bear was skinny and held its shoulders strangely, neither submissive nor brave, threatening with a question mark, ready to change its mind. "Don't eat me," Rapunzel begged. "Please." Although she did wonder how something that size could eat a whole human anything, even a baby human being. The bear's orange eyes darted from side to side, either threatened by the tone of her voice or very, very confused by it. It stopped to the side and back again and yipped. Slaver dripped from its mouth. "Oh, you're drooling," Rapunzel said with a pity. "You are hungry, but I'm not good to eat at all. I've been cooped up in a tower all my life. No exercise at all. These muscles are all flabby and soft, and I've rarely seen the sun, so... Actually, now that I think about it, I do sound kind of tasty." She put one hand to her hair. Even if she planned to do it, could she kill this bear? The way she did with the chickens? Would it be fast enough? She had no intention of harming such a magnificent tiny beast, but if it was a choice between her or it... The bear barked once. "Were you saying, maybe?" "But do you know what is tasty?" Rapunzel asked, suddenly inspired. "Goat cheese." She slowly reached into her bag, aware that any sudden movements could tip the situation. Which way, she wasn't sure. She didn't want the bear to run away, scared, hungry, and hopeless. But she also didn't want it eating her, and she definitely didn't want it running a little bit away and then secretly following, only to pounce on her unexpectedly. At least if she was eaten now, there wouldn't be the tension of waiting. Her fingers found the cylinder of soft cheese wrapped in a large chestnut leaf, deep in the bag where it was cool. She started to break it in half and then watched the bear lick its chops and let its tongue hang out. It whimpered slightly. Rapunzel felt her heart break. You know, I don't think I've ever missed a single meal, even when Mother was punishing me. I may have been kept in the tower my whole life, but I've never known what it was like to be hungry. And with that, she threw the entire cheese to it. The bear caught it expertly in its narrow muzzle, then tossed it up in the air again to break the packet open. The cheese fell into 1,000 tiny crumbles all over the ground, and the bear fell too, devouring every morsel. Okay, then, I must be on my way now, Rapunzel said carefully, backing away, aware that the creature might have other plans. Goodbye. The thing barely tipped one of its large ears towards her, too busy devouring the snack. Rapunzel stopped dallying. The moment the path took the bear out of sight, she began to run. What had seemed like a grand adventure now took on more serious import. She had little food left, and had finally realized that maybe not all meetings in the great world or wilderness necessarily ended happily. Pascal was relieved to be moving away from the fox as well. It kind ate lizards like candy. He did wonder vaguely in his lizard brain why the giant human didn't just kick the nasty thing. After trotting along for a while, Rapunzel thought of one of the hills up ahead, looked like a little diseased, as if rotten carbacles were growing out of its skin. Soon it became clear that they were massive boulders that had stood on their ends. A few were tipped over or leaning against each other. The ancient circle of stones. Someone might have stopped here in wonder at the sight. Monoliths, unimaginably old looms, without meaning below an empty sky. The hilltop was lonely, devoid of birds and insects, and the wind whistled forlornly, like the story of the swallow that wore away the mountainside one scratch at a time. This circle had been eroded by wind and rain, and was already experienced the first second of eternity. Perhaps Rapunzel felt a little of that, awe of something so large that had been built so long ago by people who worshipped strange gods. In the end she did pause, gawking a little. But that moment quickly passed, and she ran the rest of the way up the hill, eager to meet her destiny. Without another thought, she ran right into the center of the ancient circle, which might have been a questionable decision in a world which contained witches and murder hair. She dropped her sack and opened her arms to embrace the day, the space, the grass, the answers, and the joy of it all. I'm ready, Rapunzel said, closing her eyes. But there was nothing. After a moment of just standing, arms open, breathing the immediately sweet air, she cautiously cracked one eye open again. The round meadow she stood in, delineated by the stones, was disappointingly normal. There were pretty clumps of white star-shaped flowers, the kind she had seen around her tower. Their petals sparkled little in the sunlight, but not unnaturally. A dusty path circled around just inside the stones. Perhaps the dark spots on it were old scorch marks, remnants of their respect, worship, or stains from grisly rites by people whose great-grandmothers barely remembered what they were for. All right, Rapunzel said brightly. I'm here. Tell me about my hair. She waited expectantly. I mean, tell me about my powers, she added after a minute. I wasn't looking for compliments or anything like that. Please? Anyone? Did a breeze pick up? Did the little flowers bend their heads as if saying something? Was there a collective pause in the world, an even deeper silence from the stones? Nope. Am I supposed to do something? She asked the stones. The stones said nothing. She thought about the scorch marks, the dusty piles of nothing at the stones' bases. Do I need to offer something in return for an answer? She didn't know how she knew this. Perhaps once again, just like the bear, she was drawing on some ancient instinct that lay deep in the bones of the human race. The gods gave nothing for nothing. People and things needed to be appeased. She picked up her sack and rummaged through it. I gave away my cheese. Do you want water? Are you thirsty? Without a second thought, she dumped her entire clay jar of water into the closest stone. The water very naturally dripped down the gray surface, sinking into where it was extra dry, but not in a startling way. No? Alright, let's see. I have some dried apples, some nuts, some seeds, some... I don't know what this is. Gina's mom packed it. Oh, it's some sort of sweet? Well, you can have it. Each thing, once named, sailed over her shoulders to hit a stone, a different one each time, and it fell down to its base. Still nothing happened. Maybe you need something from me, Rapunzel chewed her lip. Maybe you want to give me something of... You want me to give something of myself? To learn something about me? Alright, here's my knife and my travel paints. Oh, and a very tiny sketch of a wooden disc I made of what I thought my father would look like. I gave him a mustache, which I tried to erase, so it kind of looks like a caterpillar is smudged on his upper lip. But I still like it, and have had it for years. A little regretfully, she placed it in the middle of the field, unwilling to throw it. She waited. Nothing. The tiny sun moved across the sky. The moon rose into view, a bland white sickle easily missed in the pale blue sky. Otherwise, all was still. An hour later, Rapunzel was lying in the middle of the circle, head resting on her folded arms. The initially mysterious and imposing circle of stones was actually very disappointing. Whatever uses they originally had, whatever supernatural ends were erected for, they had been forgotten, and perhaps they had wound up forgetting themselves. So now they were just rocks, not meriting any more or less respect than any other rock or feature of the landscape. Therefore, Rapunzel leapt up and nimbly climbed a stone she had given in to time or weariness, and leaned into its closest stony sister for support. The steepness of the incline was no match for her bare feet. On top, the view was lovely. A nearby hill had beautiful white stones pushing up out of its grass. Their smooth surfaces shone like milk in the sunlight. The haze in the distance was mountains. Their mist-cloaked tops were obstructed, blending with the sky. But there were no giant words etched in the ground, no cliffs with secret symbols carved into their faces, no ancient gods appeared, no... I wonder if I could run all the way around the ring without falling, Rapunzel said aloud. At first frowning with concentration, and then grinning in joy, teeth bare to the wind. She ran and leapt and ran and leapt. With only one terrifying stumble, she made a complete circuit of the stones, silver hair flying out behind her. Wouldn't it be funny if that got their attention? She panted, still unsure who they were. She lay down on her stomach on the top of the stone she had finished on, chin resting in her hands. Pascal, sensing a moment of calmness from his mistress, and the warmth radiating from the rock in the sun, clambered off her neck and stood, beside her, tail touching her arm as if for reassurance she wasn't going to leave. Rapunzel smiled and petted him absently, and looked at the ground and the mess she had made, throwing around the contents of her sack, and all the pretty little clusters of white star-shaped flowers that bobbed gracefully in the slightest breeze. "Look at that, Pascal," she said dreamily. "Those blossoms there, in a row, with the ones on either side and the one big one there, they almost look like a constellation of stars. Cygnus, actually. The swan. See? That big flower in its tail? It could be Deneb, one of the brightest stars in the sky. What a funny thing, imagining the heavens below her instead of at the sky above. Let's see if we can complete the summer triangle," she said, craning her neck around to take in a whole meadow. "That's the 3 biggest stars in the sky in summer. Deneb, Altar, and Vega. Look, we can pretend that big one over there is Altar, and yes, that one next to where I threw my water jar is Vega. Actually, that's kind of funny. They really do look like the constellations. Exactly. What an odd coincidence." She frowned, narrowing her eyes in suspicion. Rapunzel knew the stars like a lord knows the borders and details of his own land. Her eyes traveled from one set of flowers to another like the meadow was a map. "That looks an awful lot like Pegasus. Those 4 stars there that make the big square. And look, that W is actually Cassiopeia." She scooped up Pascal and leapt to the next stone, changing her perspective. "Is that Hercules over there? It absolutely is, and that giant fluffy bunny." She imagined Pascal looking at her funny. Okay, that's not exactly an ancient constellation. That's one I made up, she admitted. There are bunnies drawn in the margins of the Farmer's Book of Days, book number 34, and I just love their long tails. But seriously, what's going on? These flowers make a perfect map of the night sky as if it appears right now in this season. How is that possible? Do people plant them that way? What if I came tomorrow or in the winter? Would the constellations be correct? Would there be flowers at all in the snow? Would they be in the correct position to show Orion? Wait, is this magic? She bit her lip, puzzled. This isn't the way I imagined magic would work. I thought there would be sparkles or a fairy godmother or something, but perhaps they're still trying to show me something. She carefully pushed her legs over the side of the monolith, dangling down the face of the stone until she felt she could let go. The distance between her feet and the ground was still surprisingly large, but Rapunzel only took a moment to recover from her painful landing before racing into the middle of the circle. Cygnus, Aquila, Hercules, Cassiopeia, Pegasus, Lyra, Draco. She spun around as she named the constellations, pointing at each. Okay, what now? What? She yelled in frustration, throwing her arms out and looking up at the sky. Now directly above her, transitioning the meridian, was the new crescent moon. No longer a chalky white, it was as silver as a piece of polished jewelry, somehow shining and sparkling despite the fact that it should have been nearly invisible that close to the sun, traveling through its bright day. Oh, how Rapunzel started to say. But then she was distracted because her hair began to glow. Just like when she killed the chickens, but more. Brilliantly, with the white light and the diamonds of her, Flynn's, crown. With the whiteness she imagined the foam of the midnight sea would look like. She picked up a hawk of hair and let it hang from her hands. It was like holding molten silver chains, or all the distant rivers seen from her tower, gathered up together by some unimaginable fairy tale giant. Pascal, do you see this? She demanded, holding it out for him. The lizard leaned forward, sniffing. Rapunzel suddenly panicked and pulled it away. What if he touched it? What if he killed him? And yet, she couldn't put into words exactly what went through her mind when she took the chickens' lives, but whatever it wasn't happening now. She didn't feel a strange sinking feeling at the core of her being, or the onset of death. She felt bubbly, on the cusp of something, like something deep within her was about to change in a good way, pushing out all of her in all directions, trying to alter the shape of her soul. Without knowing why, she brought her hair up to Pascal again. She knew he wouldn't be hurt. The little lizard was intrigued by whatever was going on. He nosed into her locks like a curious kitten. Immediately, the sparkles that pulsed through her hair danced around him, falling and flickering. Soon they completely covered the little lizard like snow. Rapunzel watched, enchanted. Then he sneezed. Embers of magic flicked and faded as they fell to the earth. Rapunzel gasped. Pascal was perfectly fine. He just wasn't Pascal. He was an entirely different lizard. A lizard Rapunzel had never seen before, in books or anywhere. His eyes were now two balls that perched on the side of its head and looked around independently of each other. His back was a graceful arch. His feet had two pairs of strange toes that opened up in the middle like claws. And his tail, it curled around and clasped onto her arm, prehensile and grasping, like a limp thing that just hung there to help with balance, and to occasionally break off and confuse a predator. And he was looking at himself, holding his feet out one at a time and admiring them, thwacking the tip of his tail and snapping his mouth in satisfaction, like a person. He thoughtfully gazed back at his body, considering it. His skin suddenly started to change color. A wave of brown and then red pushed through him from nose to tail. "Pascal!" Rapunzel cried. "You're a dragon!" She only wished he had turned into a slightly larger dragon so she could ride him or hug him. Rapunzel experimentally clicked an eyeball with his tongue. He didn't seem at all upset by the new shape or what appeared to be a distant cognitive upgrade. He just slowly marched up to her arm and planted himself on her shoulder, facing ahead like he had before, like he always did. The pulsing silver of her hair slowed. She watched the last streak fade and die at the tips of her longest braid. Rapunzel looked up at the moon. Now it was silent and pale, a ghost no longer calling attention to itself. The nearly invisible crescent sailed innocently across the heavens on its westward path. If someone were just randomly looking up at the sky, her eyes would have been, of course, attracted to the sun and missed its twin entirely. It was the moon, Rapunzel said in wonder. My hair has moon magic, just like Gina's mother said, from the moondrop flower. Pascal nodded. Rapunzel's eyes widened at that. Such a banal human reaction from her pet. I have a lot of questions, she said slowly. But I think we're done here. This place somehow summoned my power, or the moon did through this place, or my hair summoned power from the moon. I don't know, and I don't think anyone's going to suddenly appear and explain it all. But maybe Gina's mom can. Come on, Pascal, let's try and make it home before it's too dark. She trotted off back toward the woods, so happy she could burst. Her hair didn't just kill. It didn't have to do that. It could change and make things. But why didn't Mother know? She eventually asked. Pascal gave her a look that she couldn't or didn't want to interrupt. They walked quietly. Rapunzel felt tired and thoughtful. Soon twilight descended. She held her hand out in front of her and saw its details, clearly defined but in shades of gray. There was the tiny scar from one of her first attempts to bake a fruitcake. It wasn't a burn, but she had stupidly dragged the back of her hand against the sharp metal edge of the roasting rack. Suddenly there would be veins sticking out from the back of her hand like the good wives. Some day there would be wrinkles around her knuckles. She thought about this with fascination, not fear or horror, and wonder how she would paint it. Isn't it funny, Pascal? She said. I'm a girl. Mother Gothel is, well, a mother. And the good wife is a crone. I mean a nice crone. Older lady of intermediate years. Sorry, I don't know the right way of putting it, but we're like the three ancient goddesses, or the moon, or life. I feel like that's not by accident. When the night grew so dark that even the little white moths Pascal had been snacking on disappeared deeper into the woods, the little lizard nestled fearfully into her neck, as she had before his change. Rapunzel grinned. Don't be scared, Pascal. I think I can do something about this. She thought about the circle of stones and the feeling she had right before the sparkles, the presence of change. She imagined the moon, which maybe still hadn't set yet, as a delicate gleaming silver boat. She tried to summon the feeling of bubbling inside her. Something definitely began, but it didn't quite complete, like a stew that begins to simmer, and when a wind comes and blows the fire out, and the thick liquid slowly returns to its previously solid state. One or two final sticky bubbles popping at the surface. Her hair glowed. It shimmered and shone and pulsed, the full length of its flowing behind Rapunzel and lighting up the undersides of the trees, and throwing soft illumination at all the paler leaves and mushrooms, gleaming for a moment where it hit a drop of dew or sap. The moths who had fled returned, like a fluttering trail of silken flowers on a long, magical wedding veil, following the mesmerizing river of silver light. Pascal's eyes couldn't widen, but both held stock still for a moment, like he was taking in the beauty. Rapunzel laughed and hurried home.